It was a night that felt heavier than most. The winter air hung thick with tension, and the sound of crackling flames echoed across the estate. In the distance, an expensive gala was taking place, the ballroom gleaming with chandeliers, guests in tuxedos and gowns laughing and sipping champagne. But outside, in the garden near the mansion, the scene was anything but elegant. The wind howled as thick smoke began to curl into the sky from the guest house, which had caught fire. The thick scent of burning wood mixed with the stench of panic. "Get back! Get away from there!" The shout was high-pitched, cutting through the chaos. It was a girl's voice, young and determined. The billionaire's heart dropped as he turned to face the sound. A small figure, no more than 8 or 9, was charging toward the flames. Her dark hair flew behind her. Her tiny hands pushed through the thickening smoke without hesitation. The guests stood frozen, staring in disbelief, as the girl raced past them and toward the inferno. "Stop! Don't!" the billionaire shouted, but his words were swallowed by the smoke and the roar of the fire. His legs moved before he could think, instinctively running after her. "What are you doing?" he screamed, panic rising in his throat, but the little girl did not stop. Her face was set in a grim expression, determination flashing in her eyes as she rushed toward the fiery building. There was no time to question her actions. All the billionaire could do was watch, horrified and helpless, as she pushed forward. His mind raced. She was just a child, what was she thinking? The fire was too hot, too fast. It was madness. As he got closer, he saw her reach the door. She grabbed the handle, ignoring the searing heat that would have burned anyone else. He wanted to scream at her to run, to save herself. But she was already inside. He could barely keep up, his breathing quick and shallow, sweat soaking through his suit. In the distance, someone called for help. Fire trucks, police cars, sirens filled the air, but it was too late to stop her now. The billionaire's heart hammered in his chest as he approached the door. The flames were spreading fast, licking the sky, but the girl was nowhere in sight. Had she already gone inside? Had she given up her life for his daughter? Panic surged through him as he reached the threshold of the burning house, his breath catching in his throat. Then, from the smoke, emerged the small figure, carrying his daughter in her arms, her face pale but resolute. The girl's clothes were singed, her skin red from the heat, but she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She was holding on to his daughter, rescuing her from certain death. The billionaire froze in place, his mouth open, words failing him. The girl had saved his daughter. She had run into the fire, into the heart of the danger, and brought her out without a second thought. As the girl carefully set his daughter down on the grass, the billionaire could only watch, overwhelmed. The truth behind this act, the truth of who this child was and what had led her to this moment, had yet to unfold. But one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. I took a few moments for the smoke to clear, but even when it did, the billionaire stood frozen, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. The little girl had not only run into the fire, but she had brought his daughter out without hesitation. He wanted to rush to them, but something kept him in place. Something deep inside told him to wait, to understand what was truly going on. The sirens of the fire trucks and ambulances grew louder, but the scene before him felt surreal. The billionaire glanced at his daughter, still unconscious, being attended to by the paramedics. His eyes shifted back to the girl, this small, courageous figure standing at the center of it all. She was covered in soot, her face streaked with the ash of the fire, yet she stood tall and unshaken, as though rescuing a life from certain danger was just another day for her. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw something he hadn't expected: clarity, purpose, a story untold. "You saved her," the billionaire said, his voice barely a whisper. The girl, without speaking, nodded. She didn't boast. She didn't demand recognition. She simply looked at him, as if waiting for something more. There was no arrogance in her eyes, just the quiet strength of someone who had known hardship, but refused to let it define them. "Why did you do it?" the billionaire finally managed to ask. The girl's lips trembled for a moment, as though the weight of the question was too much to bear. Then, in a soft voice, she replied, "Because no one else would." The billionaire blinked, as if the truth had hit him like a slap. His heart squeezed painfully. He looked around at the chaos, the fire trucks, the paramedics, the guests who had stood there in shock while the girl had made her move. Why hadn't anyone else stepped forward? Why had they all stood frozen, too afraid to act? A cold shiver ran through him as he realized just how much of his world had been built on power, on control, on wealth, and yet, in that moment, a little girl had shown him something far more valuable. She had shown him what it meant to be human. "But, who are you?" he asked, his mind still scrambling to make sense of everything. The girl hesitated for a moment before looking down at her hands, as if she were contemplating her answer. "I'm nobody," she said quietly. "Just someone who does what needs to be done." Her words stung, and the billionaire could feel the weight of them. Nobody? How could someone so brave, so selfless, consider themselves nobody? His gaze softened as he saw her shiver, standing in the cold, her clothes singed and torn. He wanted to do something for her, anything, but he didn't know where to begin. She was just a child, yet she had already done what so many adults wouldn't even think to do. He approached her cautiously, his voice low. "You don't have to be alone," he said. Before he could finish, the girl interrupted. "I'm not alone," she said firmly. "I have my brother. He's all I need." The billionaire paused, trying to make sense of this strange, determined little girl. She wasn't looking for sympathy, nor was she asking for anything from him. She had acted out of pure instinct, driven by something far deeper than mere obligation. The truth was clear now: this was no ordinary child. "But where do you live?" the billionaire pressed, wanting to understand. She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure it matters," she replied, her voice steady. The billionaire was stunned. How could she be so composed, so calm in the face of everything she had just done? He felt a knot tighten in his chest as he realized just how much he had taken for granted in his own life. "It matters," he said softly. The girl didn't reply. Instead, she looked back at his daughter, who was now being taken to the ambulance. She didn't seem to care about the limelight or the attention she had just attracted. She was focused, determined, and resolute. As the paramedics wheeled his daughter away, the billionaire stood there, still processing everything that had happened. The little girl had saved his daughter's life. Yet there was more to her than just that moment. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place, that made him feel like she was a part of something much bigger than herself. He wasn't sure how or why, but he knew his life was about to change. The truth behind her actions, the story she carried with her, was yet to be told, and he needed to know what it was. It had been a long night, and the billionaire could not shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. He had been standing in the cold for what felt like hours, his mind spinning as he watched the little girl who had saved his daughter's life stand quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She had already walked away from the chaos, her steps deliberate, calm, but there was a weight in her presence that kept pulling him toward her. He needed to understand why. What made her do it? Why had she risked everything? As the emergency responders continued their work, the billionaire approached the girl once again. He could not let it go. The truth behind this child's actions was something he had to uncover, no matter how uncomfortable it made him. "Can we talk?" he asked gently, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She turned to look at him, but this time, her eyes were different, less guarded, more open. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice steady but quiet. It was clear she wasn't afraid of him, but there was a certain wariness, as if she had already learned not to trust people in his position. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I need to know what happened. Why did you go into the fire? What were you thinking?" The girl looked down at her shoes, scuffing them against the gravel beneath her feet. For a long moment, she didn't answer. The billionaire could see her hesitation, as though she was trying to figure out how much of herself she was willing to reveal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because someone had to," she said. "Your daughter needed help. She couldn't do it herself." The billionaire frowned, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "But why you?" he asked. "Why not anyone else?" She shifted her weight, glancing up at him with a look that told him everything. "Because no one else was doing anything," she said simply. "Everyone stood there, watching. No one moved, no one cared." His throat tightened as the truth hit him like a tidal wave. He had been so absorbed in his own world, in his own wealth and problems, that he hadn't even seen what was happening around him. People had stood by, paralyzed, while a child, someone with nothing to her name, had been the only one to act. The billionaire swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he murmured, the weight of his words more real than he had ever felt. The girl looked at him, her expression unchanged. "Don't be," she said. "I'm not doing this for your apology. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Her words stung, but in a way, they were a wake-up call he had been avoiding for years. He had always believed that wealth, power, and status could solve problems, that they made him different, untouchable. But here was this little girl, showing him that real power came from something far more fundamental: courage, empathy, and the willingness to act when others would not. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softening as he looked at her. She hesitated again, her eyes flickering toward the ground before meeting his gaze. "Anna," she said quietly. "My name is Anna." The billionaire's heart clenched. Anna. This girl, this hero, was just a child who had stepped up when the world failed to. He felt a deep sense of shame settle in his chest. He had so much, yet it was someone like Anna who had reminded him of the values that truly mattered. "Anna," he repeated, as though saying her name would somehow make him understand what had just happened. "Why did you help my daughter? You didn't even know her." Anna shrugged slightly, as if the answer was obvious. "Because she needed help," she said simply. The billionaire stood silent for a moment, trying to process the depth of her words. He had been so focused on what he could gain, on how he could protect his wealth, that he had overlooked the basic truth. Life was fragile, and in that fragility, there was strength. He finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate in comparison to what she had done. "I don't know what to say, but thank you." Anna didn't respond. She simply nodded and turned her attention back to the ambulance, where his daughter was now being cared for. She hadn't done it for praise or recognition. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. The billionaire stood there, watching her, feeling something inside him shift. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that Anna's actions had changed him. The truth behind this child's bravery, the courage she had shown in the face of danger, was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. It had been a few days since the fire, but the billionaire could not stop thinking about Anna. He had spent his life making deals, handling power, and exerting control. But here was a little girl who had done something far more remarkable. She had acted out of pure compassion and bravery when no one else would. The guilt that had settled deep inside him continued to gnaw at him. He couldn't let this go. The truth, the real reason behind Anna's actions, was something he needed to uncover. Something told him this wasn't just about saving his daughter. It was about something deeper, something far more personal. He had to know her story. That afternoon, the billionaire arranged a meeting with Anna. He had spent hours thinking about how to approach her, what to say, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let her slip through his fingers like so many others had. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to make things right. As the door to his office opened, Anna stepped inside, looking as calm and composed as ever. The billionaire's heart tugged at the sight of her. Despite the hardships she must have faced, she carried herself with a strength that few adults possessed. She was a quiet force, and he was captivated by her presence. "Anna," he said softly, his voice catching for a moment. "Thank you again for what you did. You saved my daughter's life. I can't express enough how grateful I am." Anna nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes, however, were calm, unbothered by the praise, as if it was simply something she had to do. The billionaire studied her for a moment. "But there's something I need to understand," he continued. "You didn't know her. You didn't owe her anything. So why did you do it? Why did you risk everything?" Anna didn't hesitate. "Because she needed help," she said simply. "No one else was doing anything. I couldn't just stand there and watch. I'm not like them." The billionaire's heart sank as he absorbed her words. He had spent so many years building his empire, thinking it was all about strength and control, but here was Anna, a child with nothing, doing what he had failed to do. The billionaire couldn't keep his emotions in check anymore. "You're not like them," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "No, you're better than them, and you're better than me, too." Anna didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened just a bit. She could sense his guilt, but she didn't pity him. She simply accepted him for who he was, as if she had no expectation of anything else. "You don't have to be ashamed of what you've done," she said quietly. "But you need to understand something. People like you, with all the money and power, they think that they're the ones who get to decide what happens. But they don't. Life does. And sometimes, life asks the wrong people to step up." "It asked me." The billionaire stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. He felt something shift inside him. He had always believed that the world worked a certain way, that those with the most power and wealth should be the ones making the decisions. But Anna had shown him that the world didn't care about money or status. Life was bigger than that. It was about stepping up when it mattered most, about doing what was right when no one else would. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and heavy. The billionaire swallowed hard, the weight of Anna's words settling on his chest like a burden he could no longer ignore. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna shook her head, a small but firm gesture. "You don't need forgiveness. You need to understand, and you need to do better." She stood up, ready to leave, but before she did, she turned to face him one last time. "I didn't do it for you, and I didn't do it for your daughter," she said. "I did it because I knew it was the right thing to do, and that's all that matters." As she walked out of the room, the billionaire sat there in stunned silence, her words echoing in his mind. He had spent his entire life chasing power, believing that it was the ultimate goal. But now, in the wake of Anna's quiet, selfless act, he realized that the true power in life wasn't in what you had or what you controlled. It was in what you did when no one was watching. He had a long road ahead of him, one filled with difficult decisions and hard truths, but for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. Anna had shown him that change was possible. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to change too. It had been a week since the fire, and the billionaire found himself unable to shake the thoughts of Anna. Despite all the business meetings, the phone calls, the endless flow of work that usually occupied his mind, he couldn't get her out of his head. He kept thinking about what she had said, the way she had acted, and how she had reminded him of everything he had been ignoring for years. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury, wealth, and power. But in the end, none of it had given him the clarity that Anna had shown him in just a few moments. She had acted when no one else would, when it had mattered most. It was that kind of courage that had saved his daughter's life, and now, it was time for him to act. He could no longer stand by as a passive observer in his own life. The billionaire's thoughts circled back to the conversation they had shared in his office. He knew it was time to confront the uncomfortable truth. He had been part of a system that had allowed people like Anna to be ignored, to be forgotten. He had allowed the world to operate in a way that told people like Anna they didn't matter. But she had shown him that they did. And now, he had a responsibility to do something about it. He couldn't let it go. He had to find Anna again, and this time, he had to do more than just thank her. He had to make a promise, one that would change the course of both their lives. The next day, he had his assistant track her down. It wasn't easy. Anna didn't have an address listed anywhere, and there were no records of her being part of any school or organization. She had no ties to the world he knew, but that was exactly what made him realize how deeply he had failed her and countless others like her. After hours of searching, they finally found her at a local shelter, one he had driven past 100 times without giving it a second thought. The billionaire arrived there, standing outside the small building, taking in the sight of the place that he had never bothered to notice before. The doors opened, and Anna appeared, looking as unaffected as ever, as if she had expected this meeting all along. The billionaire stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Anna," he said, his voice steady, but the weight of what he was about to say was heavy. "I want to make things right. I can't change the past, but I can start with the future. I've been wrong, and I want to help you. I don't want you to feel like you're alone anymore." Anna looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. For a second, the billionaire wondered if she would turn him away, if she would see him as just another rich man trying to make up for his mistakes with money. But then, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You can't fix everything," she said, her eyes locking with his. "You can't change the world overnight, but you can do one thing. You can stop ignoring people like me. People who don't have a voice, who don't have a chance. You can use what you have to help others, not just yourself. Her words stung, but they were the truth. The billionaire had spent his life building an empire. And in doing so, he had forgotten the most important lesson: that true success was not about amassing wealth, but about using that wealth to lift others up. He had been so focused on building his world that he had forgotten the world around him, and now Anna had made him see that. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the promise he was about to make. "I'm not going to let you down," he said, his voice more determined than ever. "I'm going to change things, starting with you. I'm going to give you the opportunity to live a life that you deserve, and I'm going to make sure you have the support you need to get there." Anna's expression softened slightly, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say. The billionaire understood. This wasn't about saving her. It was about giving her the chance to save herself. And that was the only thing that mattered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "This is just the beginning," he said, as he wrote down a generous sum. "But it's a start. I want to help you, Anna, and I want to help other kids like you, who have been forgotten." Anna took the check, but instead of looking at the money, she held it in her hands, feeling its weight. "I don't need your money," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I need you to do something with it. Help people. Really help them." The billionaire nodded, the weight of her words settling deep within him. "I will," he said, and he meant it. The billionaire walked away from the shelter that day with a new sense of purpose. He had no illusions about how difficult it would be, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. Anna had changed everything, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to the promise he had made. It had been 2 weeks since the billionaire's conversation with Anna, and he was already seeing the first signs of change. He had begun using his wealth, his resources, and his influence in ways he had never considered before. His life was no longer just about the empire he had built. It was now about rebuilding lives that had been neglected for far too long. Anna's words echoed in his mind every day. Asterisk, help people. Really help them. Asterisk. It was easy to be a philanthropist when you were handing out money without a second thought. But true help meant understanding what people needed. It meant getting involved in their lives. And that was what he intended to do. He spent the next few days organizing meetings with local shelters, schools, and community programs, asking them what they needed most and how he could make a real difference. He wasn't just going to write checks anymore. He was going to make sure the money was used in the most effective way possible. He knew that it wasn't enough to throw money at the problem. He needed to change the system, to give people like Anna the tools and opportunities to succeed, not just charity. He was no longer content with the passive role he had played in the world. He was going to be active, to fight for the people who had been forgotten, just like Anna had been forgotten. But even as he made these strides, there was a part of him that felt unsettled. He knew he couldn't just fix everything in one go. He couldn't undo the years of neglect and apathy. But at least he was trying. At least he was doing something. And then, one afternoon, as he was wrapping up a meeting with a local youth center, his phone rang. It was Anna. He hadn't expected to hear from her. They had agreed that they'd go their separate ways after their conversation, with him working to make good on his promise and her continuing with her own life. He picked up the phone, his heart racing just a little. "Hello," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Caldwell?" Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made him stop everything he was doing. "Yes, Anna. What's going on? I need to talk to you," she said. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but he could tell something was wrong. "Of course. What's happened?" He was already reaching for his jacket, ready to leave his office and find her wherever she was. "Can you meet me?" she asked. "I'm at the park, by the old bench near the lake. I'll wait for you." He could feel a knot form in his stomach. He had seen the way Anna acted. She was never one to call for help unless it was absolutely necessary. He had a bad feeling about this. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said, before hanging up the phone. The drive to the park felt like the longest drive of his life. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. When he finally pulled up, he spotted Anna sitting on the bench by the lake, her figure barely visible in the fading light of the afternoon. He got out of the car, rushing toward her. As he approached, she stood up and walked toward him, her eyes full of something he couldn't read. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him with a gaze that seemed much older than her years. "What's going on, Anna?" he asked gently. "Why did you call me?" She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much she should say. "It's my brother," she finally said, her voice quiet. "He's been sick for a while, and I don't know how to help him." His heart sank. "What's wrong with him?" Anna bit her lip, her eyes searching the ground before looking back up at him. "He's been in and out of the hospital. He has a heart condition, and we can't afford the treatment. I don't know what to do." The billionaire felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so focused on his own efforts to make things right, but here was Anna, standing before him, still carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Anna, he began, but she cut him off. "Don't offer me money," she said quickly. "I don't want that. I want you to help me figure out what to do. I can't lose him, but I don't know how to fix this." The billionaire stared at her for a long moment. He had been so focused on helping her that he had failed to consider that she might need something more than just resources. She needed guidance, she needed support, she needed someone to help her navigate the very system he had started trying to change. This was where he needed to start. "We're going to get him the treatment he needs," he said, his voice firm. "But we're also going to do something bigger. We're going to make sure that kids like your brother don't fall through the cracks anymore, that they get the care they need, no matter what." Anna looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if she were trying to find out if he was just making empty promises. But after a few moments, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, though her voice was still tinged with worry. The billionaire placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "You don't have to do this alone, Anna. I promise." As they stood there, side by side, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the lake. In that moment, the billionaire knew that his journey was just beginning, and that Anna had not only changed his life, but also the lives of countless others who had been ignored for far too long. It had been several weeks since the billionaire had promised Anna that he would make things right. He had kept his word. He had started a new foundation, one that focused on providing health care for underprivileged children, ensuring that no child had to suffer due to a lack of resources. Anna's brother had received the treatment he needed, and for the first time in a long time, the billionaire felt like he was making a real difference. But as successful as the foundation had been, there was still something gnawing at him. Something was missing. He had kept his promise to Anna, but he knew deep down that he hadn't truly understood what she had meant when she said that people like her were invisible, that they had no voice. He had thrown money at the problem, yes, but that didn't mean he had addressed the root cause of the issue. That's when it hit him. The people he was trying to help, the kids like Anna, didn't just need money. They needed a voice. They needed to be seen. And that's when he realized that the true change needed to come from within, from the systems that had allowed people like Anna to be ignored. He knew he couldn't do it alone. It was time to reach out to others, to connect with people who shared his vision and who had the same drive to make a lasting impact. He called in the best experts, community leaders, and activists he could find, inviting them to a meeting at his office. He didn't want this to be a top-down initiative. He wanted to learn, to listen, and to truly understand what needed to be done to create systemic change. As the group gathered around the table, the billionaire stood at the head of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of those seated before him. He had spent so much of his life in the boardrooms, making decisions based on logic and strategy, but this was different. This was not about business. This was about people. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I can make a real impact. I thought throwing money at problems would solve them, but I've learned that it's not that simple. Money isn't enough. We need to address the systems that keep people in poverty, that make them invisible, that deny them opportunities." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the people who had dedicated their lives to helping those in need. He knew he had a lot to learn. "I can't do this alone. I need your help. I need you to show me where we start, how we can make the real change, how we can help those who feel like they don't matter." One of the community leaders, a woman who had worked with low-income families for years, spoke up. "It starts with education. she said firmly. If we want to help these kids, we have to give them the tools they need to succeed. We need to invest in schools, in teachers, in after-school programs, and in job training. We need to give them opportunities, not just handouts. The billionaire nodded. I agree, he said. But it's not just about education. It's about access to healthcare, housing, and jobs. It's about creating a system that supports people, instead of trapping them in cycles of poverty. The conversation continued for hours, as everyone at the table shared their thoughts and experiences. It was a difficult conversation, one that made the billionaire confront his own privilege and the ways he had been blind to the struggles of others. But it was also an eye-opening conversation, one that helped him understand just how deep the problem ran and how much work it would take to fix it. As the meeting came to a close, the billionaire stood up, feeling more resolute than ever. He wasn't just going to be a philanthropist. He wasn't just going to write checks and hope for change. He was going to fight for change. He was going to use his wealth, his influence, and his resources to dismantle the systems that had kept people like Anna in the shadows. He was going to make sure their voices were heard, and he was going to make sure that, no matter where someone came from, they had a real shot at a better life. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice filled with determination. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but together, we can make this happen. We can change the system. As the group began to disperse, the billionaire felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had finally found his purpose. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about changing the future. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, there would be challenges, but he was ready. And this time, he wasn't going to stop until the change was real. It had been 6 months since the billionaire had taken the first steps to make things right, but as much progress as he had made, the road ahead was far from smooth. The foundation was growing, and it was helping more children every day, but there were still roadblocks at every turn. The systems that kept people like Anna in the shadows were deep-rooted and stubborn, and despite his best efforts, real change felt slow. He couldn't stop, though. He couldn't afford to. Not when he knew how much more needed to be done. He was sitting in his office one late afternoon, his desk littered with reports, when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and froze. It was Anna. He hadn't heard from her in months. He quickly answered, his voice full of concern. Anna? Is everything okay? There was a pause on the other end, and then her voice, calm as ever, filled his ear. I need your help. The billionaire's heart skipped a beat. He didn't even have to ask what was going on. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Where are you? He asked immediately. I'll come to you. No, Anna said. I need you to meet me at the community center. There's something you need to see. The line went dead before he could respond. Without wasting another second, he grabbed his coat, his mind racing. The community center was located in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city, a place where the billionaire had visited only a handful of times, always in the presence of others. But this time, he was going alone, and as he drove through the streets, he felt a sense of unease settle in his stomach. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but whatever it was, he could feel it was going to challenge everything he thought he understood about the work he was doing. When he arrived at the community center, Anna was already there, standing by the entrance. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes, they were different, more tired, more serious. What's going on, Anna? He asked, stepping out of the car. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and walked toward the building, motioning for him to follow. Inside, the space was buzzing with activity. There were kids in one corner, doing their homework, a few others practicing basketball, and a group of older teens gathered around a table, talking quietly. It wasn't a luxurious place, but it was alive, filled with people who had a sense of purpose, despite everything stacked against them. Anna led him to a room in the back of the building. It was quiet here, the noise of the rest of the center muffled by the thick walls. As they entered, the billionaire's eyes immediately fell on a man sitting at a desk, his back to them. The man turned slowly when he heard them approach, and the billionaire's breath caught in his throat. It was someone he recognized, someone he hadn't seen in years. His old business partner, the man who had helped him build his empire, the same one who had helped him become who he was. The billionaire's face hardened. What is he doing here? He asked, his voice sharp. Anna didn't flinch. "You should ask him," she said, her voice steady, but there was a hardness in it now that the billionaire hadn't heard before. The man stood up, a small smile on his face. "Nice to see you again, old friend," he said. The billionaire didn't return the smile. "What are you doing here?" he repeated, this time more forcefully. The man's smile faded. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice calm. "I've been working with Anna and the kids here. There's a lot of potential in these kids, you know. They just need the right opportunities." The billionaire didn't believe him. He knew this man. He had seen the way he had used people for his own gain, how he manipulated situations to keep himself on top. "You're not here to help," the billionaire said coldly. "You're here to profit. You always were." The man's face tightened. "You've changed," he said, his voice colder now. "I'm here for the same reason you are, to make a difference, but I'm doing it the smart way." The billionaire could feel his blood pressure rising. He wanted to throw this man out, to tell him that he was no longer welcome in the world Anna had opened his eyes to, but Anna spoke before he could. "He's not here to steal from us," she said, her voice firm but calm. "He's here because he wants to make things right too, and I think you should listen to him." The billionaire looked at her, his expression softening. He hadn't expected her to speak up like that, especially for someone he considered a manipulator. But then again, Anna had always surprised him. She was strong, independent, and fiercely determined. If she saw something in the man, maybe there was something worth listening to after all. "What's your plan?" the billionaire asked, trying to push aside his skepticism. The man sighed, as though he knew he had a lot to prove. "I know what you've been doing," he said, his tone still guarded. "But there's a bigger picture here. We can't change things by throwing money at it. We need to build sustainable systems, invest in education, healthcare, and job programs. If we work together, we can make this work." The billionaire didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Anna, who was watching him carefully. He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. If he truly wanted to make a difference, he needed to think bigger beyond just his own actions, beyond just his own ideas. He needed to embrace this partnership, even if it was with someone he once trusted, but now questioned. "I'll listen," he said finally. The man nodded, as if he knew this was only the beginning of a long conversation. As the billionaire looked at Anna, he realized how much this moment meant. It wasn't just about the work they had done so far. It was about building something real, something that would last. And it wasn't going to be easy. But with Anna by his side, and with this man's help, maybe they could finally create the change that so many people had been waiting for. IT was the beginning of a new chapter. The billionaire had committed to change, and now he had to prove it. The partnership with his former business partner, someone he had never fully trusted, was something he had to navigate carefully. He had to push aside his past doubts and fears and embrace this new venture, not for the sake of the money, but for the sake of the people they were trying to help. Anna had stood by him, believed in him, and even in this uneasy alliance, she remained the one person who had never wavered in her commitment to the cause. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized that real change wasn't just about money, and it wasn't about making deals. It was about making sacrifices, about standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. But no matter how much progress he had made, there was still one question lingering in his mind. Asterisk. Could this actually work? Asterisk. He had been successful in business for so long because he always had the answers, because he had always been the one who made the decisions. But this was different. This wasn't about profit or growth. This was about people. This was about ensuring that children like Anna had a chance to succeed. It was about giving them the resources, the tools, and the support they needed to thrive. For days, he couldn't shake that nagging feeling. He had all the right intentions, but was he really doing enough? Was he making the kind of impact that would last? One evening, after another long meeting with his partner, he found himself sitting in his office, staring out at the city lights. The weight of it all settled on him, a deep exhaustion he couldn't escape. Then, his phone rang. It was Anna. He hadn't heard from her in a while, and as always, her voice brought a strange comfort. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady. "We need to talk." His heart skipped a beat. There was something in her tone that made him put everything aside, focusing on her words. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice urgent. "Come to the park," she said. "I'll explain when you get here." "I'm on my way," he replied quickly, not even hesitating. The drive to the park felt longer than it should have. The city passed by in a blur, but his thoughts were consumed by the idea that something wasn't right. Anna had never called him in this way before. What was going on? When he arrived, he found her sitting at the same bench by the lake, the place where it had all started. She was alone, but her expression was different this time, more serious, more grown up than he had ever seen her. He walked over to her, a sense of urgency in his step. "What's going on, Anna?" he asked as he sat beside her. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to decide whether or not to speak. Finally, she exhaled and began to explain. "There's been a setback," she said, her voice steady but full of concern. "The kids, the ones we've been helping, they're still struggling. We've provided them with everything they need, education, food, medical care, but the system is still failing them." The billionaire felt his heart sink. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing Anna say it out loud made the reality hit harder than he had expected. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Anna leaned forward slightly. "It's not just about giving them what they need in the moment," she said. "It's about breaking the cycle they're trapped in. They don't have a chance to rise up because they're constantly being pushed down. The system is stacked against them, and even though we're giving them resources, it's not enough. They're still invisible. They're still forgotten." The billionaire stared at her, processing what she was saying. It was a hard truth, one he had feared but hadn't wanted to admit. They had made progress, yes, but it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Anna continued, her voice softer now. "I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but I think you need to understand this. The work we're doing is important, but it's just a start. We can't change things by just throwing money at the problem. We need to change the system. We need to make sure these kids are seen, that they have a real shot at something better." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. Everything he had been doing, everything he had believed in, suddenly felt like it wasn't enough. He had built an empire, but he had never truly understood the depth of the issues that Anna and so many others were facing. This wasn't just about providing for people. It was about changing the system, changing the way society viewed them. He realized that Anna was right. The real work wasn't in the foundation or the donations. The real work was in fighting the systems that kept people like Anna in the margins, fighting the systems that made them feel invisible. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't see it before, but I see it now. We have to do more. We have to make sure they're not forgotten anymore." Anna nodded, her expression softening. "I knew you'd get it," she said. For the first time in months, the billionaire felt a sense of clarity. He had thought he was doing everything he could, but Anna had shown him that the real work was just beginning. The fight wasn't over, and this time, he wasn't going to stop until they had changed everything. It had been a few weeks since the meeting in the park, and the billionaire could not shake the feeling that things were moving too slowly. Despite his best efforts to enact real change, the obstacles were still too many. There was so much to do, and yet it felt like progress was inching forward at a snail's pace. The system that had kept people like Anna invisible for so long was not going to be dismantled overnight. He had to face the reality that change took time, and that the work they were doing, while important, was only a small piece of the puzzle. But even as he struggled with the weight of it all, he knew that he couldn't give up. Not now, not when there was so much at stake. His commitment to Anna and to the countless others like her kept him going. And then, one morning, as he was preparing for another round of meetings, his phone rang. It was Anna. He immediately picked it up, his heart racing as he answered. "Anna, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She didn't respond right away, and the silence made him nervous. "Anna?" he asked again, his voice soft. Finally she spoke, her tone quieter than usual. "It's happening," she said. "They're trying to shut us down." The billionaire's stomach dropped. He had been expecting resistance. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but this was different. "What do you mean? Who's trying to shut you down?" "The people who don't want things to change," she replied, her voice steady, but he could hear the tension underneath. "The ones who have been profiting off the system as it is. They're coming for the foundation. They're trying to stop us from helping the kids, from giving them a chance." The billionaire's mind raced as he processed what she was saying. "How?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. "They're using their influence," Anna said. "They've started a smear campaign. They're telling everyone that we're wasting money, that we're not actually helping. They're trying to turn people against us." He could hear the frustration in her voice. He knew Anna well enough to understand that she didn't back down easily. She had always been a fighter, but this was something different. The stakes had just become even higher. "I'm on my way," the billionaire said immediately. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out." He hung up the phone and stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was not how he had envisioned things going. But he wasn't going to let them take everything they had worked for. Not now. He knew the system was rigged, but that didn't mean he was going to let it crush them. He was going to fight, and this time, he was going to fight with everything he had. He didn't waste another second. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door. The drive to the community center felt like it took an eternity. Every second that passed made the weight of the situation press down on him more and more. What could they do to stop this? How could they fight back against the powerful forces trying to crush them? When he finally arrived, Anna was waiting for him outside. Her face was set, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that told him she was ready for whatever came next. "What's the plan?" the billionaire asked as he stepped out of the car. Anna didn't hesitate. "We fight back. We get the truth out there. We show them that we're doing what's right." The billionaire nodded. "How do we do that?" "We go public," Anna said. "We gather the people who believe in us, the people who know we're making a difference. We go to the media. We show the world who we're helping and why we're doing this." The billionaire felt a surge of determination. Anna was right. If they were going to win this fight, they couldn't do it quietly. They had to stand up, make their voices heard. It was time to show the world that they were not backing down. "Let's do it," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Over the next few days, the billionaire and Anna worked tirelessly. They gathered the people who had benefited from the foundation, the kids who had been given a chance at a better life, the teachers who had worked tirelessly to support them. They spoke to the media, went on interviews, and told their story to anyone who would listen. The smear campaign had already started, but they were fighting back with the truth. And slowly, the tide began to turn. People began to see the real impact of what they were doing, and the support for their cause grew. The billionaire's phone rang more than ever before, calls from philanthropists, business leaders, even government officials offering their support, pledging their help in making sure the foundation continued. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was working. The power of their collective voices was beginning to drown out the lies that had been spread about them. But just as things were starting to turn around, there was a knock on the billionaire's office door. He opened it to find one of his lawyers standing there, a grim expression on his face. "We've got a problem," the lawyer said. "It's not over yet." It had been a whirlwind of a week. The billionaire had never felt more on edge. After the meeting with his lawyer, everything seemed to spiral. The smear campaign that had threatened to derail everything he had built was only the beginning. Now, the true battle was upon them. Legal threats had surfaced. Accusations of mismanagement and fraud were being spread, and the very foundation he had worked so hard to establish was being torn down by those who didn't want change. The phone calls kept coming, but they were no longer filled with offers of support. They were filled with demands, legal notices, and warnings. It seemed like every move he made was met with opposition, and the people he thought would stand beside him were now distancing themselves. Anna had been right. They had underestimated the lengths people would go to protect their power. The billionaire knew he couldn't face this alone. He had spent his life fighting for what he wanted, but this was different. This wasn't just about business. This was about making a difference in a world that didn't want to change. And if he wanted to succeed, he would need to call on every ounce of strength he had, along with the help of those who believed in the cause. Anna had been the one who kept him grounded through it all. When everything seemed like it was falling apart, she was there, offering a sense of clarity and purpose that he desperately needed. She had become not just a symbol of hope, but a reminder that they were fighting for something much bigger than themselves. As the billionaire sat in his office, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, he made a decision. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The system might be rigged, but he wasn't going to let it crush everything they had worked for. He picked up the phone and dialed Anna's number. "We need to fight back," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not going to let them destroy everything we've built." "I knew you'd say that," Anna replied, her voice steady as always. "But it's going to take more than just fighting. We need a plan. We need to get ahead of them." The billionaire nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "What do you suggest?" "We need to expose the truth," Anna said, her tone sharp. "We have to show everyone what's really going on. We can't let them control the narrative." The billionaire took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling in. She was right. They couldn't just keep reacting. They needed to be proactive. They needed to take the fight to the people who were trying to shut them down. "I'll set up a press conference," he said. "We'll get the media on our side. We'll show the world the truth." Anna's voice softened. "We'll need more than just the media. We need the people. The real people who have been affected by this. The kids, the families, the teachers. We need to show them that this isn't just about us. It's about all of us." The billionaire stood up, walking to the window of his office, looking out at the city below. It was a city he had spent years building a legacy in. But now, he realized, his legacy wasn't going to be defined by how much wealth he accumulated. It was going to be defined by how he fought for the people who needed it the most. He turned back to his desk, his resolve stronger than ever. "We'll get them," he said. "We'll get the truth out there, and we won't back down until we've changed the system." The next few days were a blur of meetings, preparations, and strategy sessions. The billionaire and Anna worked tirelessly to craft their message, gathering support from everyone who had benefited from the foundation's work. They reached out to community leaders, teachers, doctors, and even former critics who had seen firsthand the impact of their efforts. The media coverage was relentless, but for the first time, it was in their favor. The truth began to seep into the public consciousness. The billionaire's name, once associated only with wealth and business, was now tied to a cause much larger than himself. People rallied around them. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and for the first time in weeks, the billionaire felt a glimmer of hope. But even as the public support grew, the battle was far from over. The legal challenges continued, and the powerful figures who had tried to shut them down were not going to give up easily. They fought back harder, using every tool at their disposal to discredit the foundation. The billionaire knew they had to be ready for the long haul. They had to be prepared to keep fighting, no matter what. As the press conference date approached, the billionaire and Anna stood side by side, facing a room full of reporters. This was it. This was their chance to expose the truth, to show the world what was really at stake. Anna spoke first, her voice steady and strong. "We're not here to fight for ourselves," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "We're here to fight for the kids, for the families, for everyone who has been ignored and forgotten. We're here to make sure that no one is left behind." The billionaire stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "We've faced opposition, we've been attacked, but we're not backing down," he said. "We're here to stay, and we're going to change the system. This isn't just about money, it's about justice." As the room erupted in questions, the billionaire knew they had turned a corner. The battle wasn't over, but they had the truth on their side, and they weren't going to stop until they had won. It had been a month since the press conference, and the billionaire was starting to see the impact of their efforts. The tide was slowly turning in their favor, but it was a hard-fought victory that hadn't come without its scars. The legal battles were still ongoing, but the truth was now out in the open, and the people who had tried to silence them were being exposed for the corruption they had been hiding. The foundation's work had never been more visible, and the billionaire was more determined than ever to continue the fight. But with the attention came new challenges. There were still powerful figures who did not want things to change, and they were using every tactic in the book to push back. The billionaire spent hours in meetings with his team, strategizing ways to navigate the storm. The people behind the smear campaign hadn't given up, but now, there was more public pressure than ever. The billionaire couldn't help but feel like they were on the edge of something bigger, but Anna was the one who kept him grounded. She had become the force that he turned to for clarity, and after everything they had been through, he knew she was the one who could lead them through the next phase of their mission. One evening, as the billionaire was reviewing legal documents, he received a call from her. "It's time," Anna said simply, her voice firm. "What do you mean?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "We've done everything we can with the media and the public. she said. But now, it's time to make the people who tried to shut us down answer for their actions. We need to take it to the next level. The billionaire sat back in his chair, absorbing her words. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he realized how much courage it would take. This wasn't just about fighting for a cause anymore. It was about making sure that justice was served, that those who had abused their power to keep the system broken would be held accountable. He looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, and thought about the path that had brought him here. He had started as a businessman, driven by wealth and success, but now it was about more than that. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady with determination. "Let's do it." They both knew it wouldn't be easy. Exposing the corruption at the heart of the system was no small task, but with Anna by his side, and with the public support they had built, the billionaire felt ready to take on the fight head first. The next day, they organized a meeting with some of the top journalists and legal experts, people who had been following their story since the beginning. They had become allies in their fight for justice, and now it was time to take things further. The billionaire and Anna laid out their plan, one that would expose the key players behind the corruption. They would gather the evidence, bring it to light, and hold the guilty parties accountable. It was a calculated risk, but they knew they had no choice. The stakes were too high. As the meeting came to a close, the billionaire felt a sense of resolve wash over him. They had the plan, they had the support, and now, all they needed was the courage to follow through. "This is it," Anna said as they walked out of the meeting. "We're not just fighting for the kids anymore, we're fighting for the future." He nodded, his mind focused on the next step. "We're going to make sure this never happens again," he said. "We're going to change everything." It wasn't just about making the system better, it was about tearing down the barriers that had been built up over decades, about creating a world where kids like Anna didn't have to fight for a future, they could live it. As the days passed, the pressure began to mount. The billionaire and Anna worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, reaching out to people who had been directly affected by the corruption, and preparing for the inevitable backlash that would come. The powerful figures they were up against weren't going to go down without a fight, but they were ready. And as they stood together, looking at the long road ahead, they knew one thing for certain: they weren't backing down. The foundation, their work, and their mission to bring justice to those who needed it most, it all came down to this moment. The fight for change was far from over, but with every step they took, they were getting closer to the truth. They were on the cusp of something monumental, and nothing would stop them from seeing it through. It was finally time. The battle had been long and grueling, but the billionaire had never been more certain of his purpose. The past few months had been filled with more obstacles than he could have ever imagined. Legal battles, public scrutiny, and constant pushback from those in power who were desperate to protect the system they had built. But through it all, he had remained focused. He had remained determined. And now, he was ready for the final push. The foundation was stronger than ever. The people who had rallied behind them, teachers, community leaders, even parents, had shown that change was possible. And it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about creating a lasting, systemic transformation. A world where kids like Anna wouldn't have to fight for a future, they would be given one. He had learned so much over the past few months. He had learned that true power wasn't about controlling everything around you. It was about empowering others, about lifting people up and giving them the tools they needed to succeed. That was what he had been missing for so long. That was what Anna had taught him. The next day, he stood in front of a packed room, the media waiting to hear what he had to say. It wasn't just another press conference. This time, it was different. This time, he was making a promise not just to Anna, not just to the kids he had been fighting for, but to everyone who had been left behind by the system. "We've come a long way," he began, his voice steady, the weight of his words carrying through the room. "But this is just the beginning. We've fought hard for what we believe in, and we've proven that change is possible. But the fight is far from over. There are still millions of kids out there who don't have the opportunities they deserve. There are still families who are being left behind, and that's something I can't stand by and let continue." He paused, glancing around the room. His eyes met Anna's in the front row, and for a moment, he saw the quiet strength in her face. She had been the reason he kept going, the reason he didn't give up when everything seemed impossible. He turned back to the crowd, his resolve stronger than ever. We are going to build a world where no one is forgotten, a world where every child, no matter where they come from, has a shot at a better life. And we're not going to stop until that happens. The room was silent, and then, slowly, the applause began. The billionaire felt a sense of relief wash over him, but there was no time to rest. This was just one moment in the journey. There was still so much work to be done. The rest of the press conference was filled with questions, but he knew that the message had been heard. They were ready, and together, they would change the world. The next few months were filled with momentum. The foundation continued to grow, and the billionaire worked tirelessly to ensure that the work they were doing was making a real difference. He had partnered with governments, educational institutions, and corporations to build programs that would change the way children from underprivileged backgrounds were educated, supported, and empowered. He knew that the fight wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges. There would still be those who wanted to see the system remain unchanged. But he had Anna by his side, and the people they had brought together were stronger than ever. They weren't fighting just for the kids anymore. They were fighting for a future where every person had a chance, no matter where they came from, no matter what obstacles they faced. One day, as the billionaire was walking through one of the schools that the foundation had helped fund, he saw a group of children sitting in a classroom, their faces lit up with excitement as they listened to their teacher. For the first time in his life, the billionaire understood what success truly meant. It wasn't in the number of zeros on a paycheck. It wasn't in the size of an empire. It was in moments like these moments where he saw kids learning, growing, dreaming. Moments where he knew that the work they had done had changed lives. As he watched the children, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Anna standing beside him, her eyes full of warmth. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with pride. The billionaire smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. "We did," he replied, and for the first time in a long time, he knew that everything they had fought for was worth it. Together, they had built something that would last a future where no one would be left behind. The journey had been long, and it had been hard. But in the end, they had changed the world. And it was only just the beginning. I end this inspiring tale of change, courage, and resilience. The story of a billionaire's journey to redemption and transformation unfolds, driven by the powerful impact of Black stories. Through his partnership with Anna, a young girl from an underprivileged background, the billionaire comes to understand the true power of empathy, justice, and fighting for what's right. Anna's bravery in standing up against the system and her fight to bring attention to the invisible children of society sparks a revolution that challenges the existing power structures. As the billionaire works tirelessly to create lasting change, the journey explores the realities of confronting systemic injustice and how Black stories like Anna's can spark a movement that reshapes the future. With each step of their journey, the billionaire learns that true success isn't about wealth or power, but about uplifting those who have been marginalized. These Black stories show the world the importance of fighting for equality and giving every child the opportunity to succeed. As the billionaire commits to breaking down barriers and creating opportunities for future generations, he realizes that the change he sought all along wasn't just in his own life, but in the lives of those who were once left behind. This is a testament to how Black stories have the power to change the world and make a lasting difference for generations to come. Through determination, love, and unwavering commitment, the billionaire and Anna show the world that real power lies in the hands of those who fight for justice and equality.